Every new MMO system requires a gimmick to keep its players invested, and in MapleStory that is called Starforcing. There are other systems, but the most prominent and the most significant of them all would be Starforcing. This is not just because it is the most effective at allowing a player to progress through the content, it is also because of the dire consequences tied to failing. In most MMOs, an enhancement system is just that. Sometimes you fail, so you've wasted resources on that level, and you go back and you attempt it over and over again. Now, in MapleStory,
Damn, what the fuck? Damn, what the
Anyway, the Starforce system involves a sequence of trials. After a certain point in the levels, if you fail, you will drop a level instead of keeping that level and having wasted resources to try to go to the next level. There's a double-pronged punishment. In a lot of these levels where you can fall, usually it is accompanied with the probability of you destroying your item, bringing you all the way back down to level 12. Now, as you can imagine, this results in a more than reasonably complicated model for the typical player to wrap their head around. There are online guides from very enthusiastic players such as Suckhard, I know, the name's great, and some other individual that I featured at the start of this video. The simulators that they have constructed are updated regularly, and they incorporate the individual meso costs associated with each trial, and they also incorporate all of these behaviors, all of these probabilities for each of these trials respectively. What they do not do, however, is do a reasonable amount of presentation, and they don't do a very good job at comparing changes or that Nexon has made to their game systems. Like recently, last year in August, a bunch of things have recently been changed. Another thing that these simulators that are available online do not provide is the ability for players to experiment with what would happen if Nexon decided to not incorporate certain aspects to their Starforce system, or to just make a naive comparison with other games such as Lost Ark. Now consider the following. You are a player before August 2022. We are able to create trials that cause you to fall a level every time you fail, progress through by 1 every time you succeed a trial. In special circumstances, we can annotate an asterisk on a level to denote that failure on that level does not mean that you will fall for that level. To add even further details to this hypothetical simulation we are constructing, consider a segment of trials to have a third possibility, that if you were to fall within a third set of probability values, that you actually destroy the item. You fall into stage 12. For trials that allow you to stay in place, in other words, you would denote them by an asterisk, but also have a probability of making the player boom, we can denote this special trial by a combination of 2 trials. The first one would be the boom trial, and this specifically only tests for the boom. And the second trial would be the one that actually tests for the success of the trial, allowing the player to move forward. So for example, at 15 to 16, you have 30% chance of actually succeeding, a 67.9% chance of failing and staying at 15, and a 2.1% chance of falling all the way back to level 12 with a broken item. We can construct this trial with a combination of 2 trials. The first one would be the 2.1% chance boom trial, and the second trial would be a standard template trial that has a probability of 30.64%. This figure is obtained by 30% divided by the remainder of the probability excluding the boom probability. So 0.3 divided by 1 minus 0.021, 0.021 being the probability of you booming the item. The product of these two Bernoulli trials still produces a trial where there's a 30% chance of the player succeeding and carrying on to stage 16. However, it also has a 2.1% chance of the player destroying their item. Because these two trials will not actually have asterisks appended to them, hypothetically in this scenario, failing the second trial merely brings you back to the boom trial. For trials that can potentially cause the player to fall when they fail and boom the item, we can instead split it up into two trials again. Suppose it's 30% chance again, and it has a 67.9% chance of falling and a 2.1% chance of destroying the item. You can break this down into a first trial which has a 97.9% chance of succeeding or causing the player to fall to stage 12, and the second trial would be one that is denoted by a 30.64% chance again. However, it will be annotated by, let's just say, capital T. What this means is that this second trial, failing it causes the player to fall by two trials in the simulation, thereby allowing us to simulate a trial where you didn't quite boom the item, but you still failed it, so you're falling to the previous trial. To summarize, if we have a trial where there's a 30% chance of success, a 70% chance of failure with no worries regarding to boom, we would denote that trial with a 0.3, assuming that you actually fall upon failure. If you have a trial where you have a 30% chance of success and there's no need to worry about booming, you would denote it by 0.3 with an asterisk afterwards. If you wanted to denote a trial where there is a 30% chance of success, a 67.9% chance of failure, and a 2.1% chance of booming, you would denote it by two trials. The first one would be denoted by 0.979H. H denoting the trial upon failure leads you down to stage 12. And the following trial after that would be a simple trial that just says 0.3064. This is a trial where you don't have to worry about falling, but you do have to worry about booming. A trial where you can succeed at a 30% chance, you can fail at a 67.9% chance, and you can boom at a 2.1% chance, but you will fall if you hit that 67.9% chance, which is most of them really. You would denote it the same way, 0.979H and 0.3064, but you'd put a capital T at the end for that second stage. All of that was a little bit heavy. To skip to the end, considering the fact that Starforce goes from 10 stars to 21 stars, we have the following scenario. And here is what it would look like if there were no such thing as booms. With a codebase that looks something like this, we can simulate and see for ourselves what damage booming actually costs to our wallets and to our souls. The information being keyed in here is the probability stages for an item to go from enhancement level 10 stars, to 21 stars. The monetary scheme, in other words the price for each trial, is that of a level 200 item in MapleStory, equivalent to arcanes. Imagine 10,000 people tapping arcane items. This is the distribution of the number of attempts it took for people to tap their arcane item from 10 stars to 21 stars. Each bucket represents a pool of 30 attempts. Every successive bar that you see is an additional 30 attempts. Simulation 1 is the scenario where booms do not exist, and Simulation 2 is the scenario where booms do exist as they do before August 2022. Moving along, we also get to another very juicy part, which is the cost distribution curve. And this represents the total amount of mesos, currency, that was required for the players to spend in order to obtain their 21-star arcanes. And as you can see here, the comparison between the distributions conveys a very, very strong message. Booms do cost more money for the unfortunate, and not only that, but it makes it more likely for you to be unfortunate because the width of that distribution shows that people are spread further and further across a set of circumstances. On the x-axis, cost is depicted in billions. With some multi-threading, we're able to produce a similar looking result with 10 million samples within an hour. At some point after August 2022, a miraculous set of things happened. One, Nexon actually made an adjustment to the Starforce system. And no, it wasn't just cost changes. In fact, one of the biggest things that we will come back to is not even that they removed booms until 15 stars. In fact, they removed the possibility of an item falling a level until 15 stars, that is. What does that look like in comparison to before August 2022? Aside from not being able to drop levels or boom prior to level 15, the prices for Starforce have increased dramatically for levels between 11 and 15 stars, and these are in stark contrast to the prices dropping sharply between 15 stars to 25 stars. And this is how they would appear if we were to input them into our simulation model. Let's have a peek. At 1 million samples, we obtain the following discrepancies for successes, and we have a somewhat less pronounced cost distribution effect between Simulation 1 and Simulation 2. Take note that Simulation 1 here is referring to what MapleStory Starforce system behaves like now for a level 200 item, as opposed to Simulation 2, which was what MapleStory Starforce simulation was like prior to these Starforce changes. And costs are now in millions, as opposed to billions before. At first glance, it should be very evident that the total number of taps required to achieve 21 stars has definitely shrunk. The distribution is far more narrow, meaning more people will be likely to achieve 21 stars with less attempts than before. However, Nexon has also made sure to generally balance out the numbers, the costs per trial, such that for the most part, players will not be spending that much less money as before. However, Nexon has restricted the probability of fringe cases occurring as opposed to before, given the width of the distribution. So the cost distribution curve still maintains a more squished up definitive shape, implying that costs are less likely to run amok as opposed to before. The cost changing definitely needs to be accounted for against the backdrop of totems having been removed and boss drop crystals. In the next episode, we will be identifying the biggest scam in the Starforce system that MapleStory offers its players. The single biggest culprit behind the high exorbitant cost that players have to pay for Starforce.